This is going to be a bit different from my fellow presenters who have done before. This is a very small fund compared to the others which we have seen in the afternoon, but it is a very exciting experience that I'm going to share about financing coffee sector in Kenya. When we look at commodities fund at a glance, up until last year, 1st of August, we were known as Coffee Development Fund, so we were just dealing with coffee. And then from August last year, we got other commodities brought in. So the size of the fund is approximately 235 million US dollars, but what is attributable to coffee is 10% of that is 23.5 million. So this is an initiative of the government of Kenya. The government remains the main source of funds. This is because in Kenya, the subsector is less attractive to private investors due to the long turnover periods and a client base considered as high risk. So most of the time, commercial banks shy away from financing coffee farmers. They think they are too risky. And according to a study, the subsector is in need of approximately around 100 million US dollars to meet its credit demand. And remember, we currently have around 23.5. So what is the lending approach that Commodities Fund use in Kenya? We lend directly to individual farmers. We also lend to societies, women groups, youth groups, and companies who would like to do roasting or even coffee shops. We have an intermediary approach we call wholesale, where a farmers' union can come and borrow at very subsidized rates so that they can lend it to their members. And we also have what we call corporate approach, where we use rural circles. We lend to farmers through the rural circle, so the rural circle just becomes the intermediary between commodity fund and the farmers. We finance along the value chain, right from farm establishment through to consumption and even export. So at the farmers level, we have farm establishment where we finance the establishment of a coffee farm. We finance inputs. We finance cherry advance. This is more so because of the long cycle of coffee. So from the time the farmers take the cherries to the society up until the time they are paid, it takes quite a long time. So to avoid cherry hawking, where farmers sell their cherries because they are in need of money, we have what we call cherry advance, where they deliver the coffee at the society and they are paid halfway, so that the next payment will be after the coffee has been sold. Farm level asset acquisition, etc. We also finance the primary processing, and at the society level, we bulk input of inputs, bulk purchase of inputs. We do asset financing for the society, construction of drying beds, pulp pass, etc. We also, under the secondary processing, we do the milling machines, transport, storage facility acquisition, financing. Then we support certification, warehousing and all that. All to the baby of the commodities fund, which we call do. We are trying to promote domestic consumption of coffee. We encourage small, medium-sized entrepreneurs to come up and set up the coffee houses. So Commodities Fund in Kenya has recognized that in order for us to be successful, we have to involve women. Because why? They are the source of labor. When you look at all the farms in Kenya, 80% of the labor is made up of women. So unless we involve these women in financing them, we might not be able to meet our mandate. We have also seen in a number of societies that where women are involved, the leadership quality is very high. And when the leadership quality is very high in a society, we as Commodity Fund, we are almost sure that we'll get our money back. So, however, the challenge is there are still very few women holding leadership positions in cooperatives. In fact, less than 15%. Sustainability of the coffee sector depends on involvement of women and youth. And finally, and not last but not least, economic development. In Kenya, with the new constitution in place, we are required to involve at least 30% of either gender. And in this case, the ones affected who are less than 30% are the women. So, what is the borrowing experience among women? We have approximately over 70,000 borrowers in our database at the moment. But only 17% is women. And of that 17%, they account for only 7% of the total amount borrowed. So you see, we still have a long way to go as Commodities Fund in meeting the gender equality. That is just in a graph. The 17%, which is women, around 15,000, but they borrow very little because most of the time they lack what is needed. They lack the security. The names, the titles on the lands on which they farm coffee is in their husband's names, or in their brother-in-law's names, or in their father-in-law's names. So very few women have lands registered under their name. So in absolute figures, we see that women have borrowed up to only 120 million Kenya shillings, compared to 1.3 billion men. But when you look at the irony of it, even in these men who have borrowed 1.3 billion, the people who work in their farms are the women and youth. So there's a bit of irony. And yet when you look at the repayment rate, women registers over 90% repayment rate, compared to men who do just around 80%. So if we had all our clients being women, we'll not be complaining as Commodities Fund, because the repayment will be very high. And I'm not saying this because I'm a woman myself. So, what are the challenges of financing, and specific to women in coffee? As I've mentioned just earlier, land ownership. In Kenya, we still have issues with women owning land. We still have issues, even though it's been put now in the constitution that all children can inherit land, there's still a bias towards giving to the boy child. So as a daughter, you don't count getting any land from your parents. Then there's also access to information. And this one I keep repeating. Most of the time, like, if there's a training in a society, for example, guess who will come? It's the men. The men will come. But who will implement the training? It's the women. So we have the men coming. We train them very hard how to apply the fertilizer, how to do this, how to prune. But they don't go and transfer the knowledge to the people who really work in the farm. Then we have also cultural beliefs where we believe it's the men who should get, the loan, the capital, all that. And this is one of the main challenges that it will be very hard to break. Culture is so embedded. We will do with the others, but this one will be the very last one, to tell women, yes, you can go out and get your loan as yourself. We still believe very hard on, the man being the head of the family, so he should get the capital investments and decisions, he should make the decisions. Then we have the collateral challenges, which is again tied to the land ownership issue. If you don't have a title, then you can't have a collateral, which will require as Commodities Fund before we give you the loan. So what are the general challenges of financing coffee sector in Kenya? And this one, whereas I speak, I know it's common across Africa and any other developing countries. Most of the time, these farmers are dispersed, and they are in, very far rural areas, and they are dispersed. So they are small scale. So you're getting small loans to different farmers in very far areas is a challenge. There is the lack of adequate collateral, which I have talked about. In some areas in Kenya, they are yet to get the title, the real titles to their land. In some areas, the land belongs to community. In some areas, you don't know actually who owns the land. So getting the collateral, which in most cases is the land, it becomes an issue. Then we have high cost of production. brought about by high cost of inputs. And this is specific to Kenya. I don't know other countries, because we import most of the inputs. We import the fertilizer, we import even the pesticides and others. So it takes the cost of production quite high. Then we have the governance issues among the cooperatives. We still have a lot of challenges when it comes to managing cooperative societies. And this goes a long way to even affect how the loan is repaid. Then the climate change. Sometimes everything is well until the climate change. We have a longer, drier period or too wet period, and it affects the production, and it affects productivity and production. You can have very high production, but the quality is low. So all those dynamics. And then we now lack the social support which existed before liberalization of coffee sector, where we had the government coming in with extension services and all that. And then the last but not least, we have delayed coffee payments, which lead to multiple borrowing among smallholders. You know, it takes about close to 1 year before you get the payment, the farmers tend to borrow from the microfinance, from Shylocks and all that. So that by the time it's time to repay the commodities fund loan, they have nothing to repay. So we get into the next cycle and it becomes a problem. So what are the other challenges that are affecting loan repayments in Kenya? This is again a cycle. You know, lack of finance means not enough inputs is applied, not enough fertilizer is applied to the crop, so which means poor quality of coffee. Poor quality of coffee means the price will be so low, so they get very little money coming back to them, so they don't pay. We have corporate governance issues, where we have a lot of mismanagement at the cooperative level. Yes, the farmers worked so hard, they earned so high, but then the funds were mismanaged and they failed to pay back to Commodities Fund. Then we have one main use of absolute technologies. You find in some societies in Kenya, they still use the pulping machines which were left by farmers the 1940s, 50s, over 50 years ago. And they don't want to part with it. This is what the settler farmers left. It was good. Yes, it was good then, but is it good now? Then we have poor agricultural practices, and this again is tied to lack of extension services provided like it was provided before by the government. So what are the key lessons learned? During the introduction, the chair talked about we were formed just in the other day, 2006. Actually, active operations began in 2007-8 period. So we have learned a few lessons, and it's guiding us as we go to the second strategic plan period. The strong farmer groups is key in financing the coffee sector effectively and efficiently. Without these strong farmer groups, if we don't develop the societies, the unions, will not be able to effectively reach the farmer. Then the repayments of loan by farmers depends on application of good agricultural practices. And this we have seen that the fund must get involved in ensuring that gap is followed. If we just disperse funds and we avoid getting involved in ensuring that good agricultural practices are applied, then we can as well forget the repayment, because we can give so much money to a society and they buy the wrong fertilizer, or they don't apply the fertilizer on time, or they apply the fertilizer but they fail to prune the coffee. All those combination means that the quality of coffee will be affected. And when the quality is affected, then the prices are affected, which the end product is that they fail to pay back the loans. Then advancing loans to farmers who are financially illiterate is doomed to fail. That is what we have seen. Farmers are so excited to get the money, whether they know how to use it or not. So unless we get involved and train these farmers how to, simple financial literacy, that when you get this money, this is the cost of the loan, so your profit is this. If we don't do that, the farmers will either request for too high loan or too low loan, which will not help them. And when you get a little loan which will not help you, the whole operation will fail. And so the loan will not help the farmer, and at the end of it, they will not be able to repay. So what are we doing to address the number of challenges, especially involving women and youth. We are doing a deliberate targeting. We deliberately set aside funds and say this is going to be going to women. We go to the societies, we talk to the societies, how many women are in your societies. We visit the society, we see how much coffee they have. Is it 1 acre of coffee these women have? Is it half an acre? So we target specifically and go to them. We use alternative collateral, especially women groups, where we use the microfinance model where they self-guarantee each other through the group. We are now getting involved in capacity building. We didn't do that before, we just dispersed. Now we are saying we need to do something and get involved and encourage women and youth participation in coffee, even in managing the societies. We are collaborating with other women and youth-focused organizations. In Kenya, we have Youth Fund, we have Women Fund. And these women, or these groups, are so active in those organizations. So we say, look, if you've been active in Women Fund, we collaborate with Women Fund, we get your financial history, and we see whether you can be a good borrower or not. So we are working with those other organizations. We are encouraging women and youth to engage in other value chain activities, especially like coffee shops. This is becoming very popular with the youth. If they don't want to get their hands dirty on the farm, you don't have to just farm. You can roast coffee, and you can have a small kiosk at a corner in the city, and you can still support the coffee sector. We are looking at women coming together and buying coffee and exporting together. So there are various activities along the value chain. We now have the small governments, we call the county governments in Kenya, and they are wielding a very big power in their, in their jurisdiction. So we've realized we have to work with them, because if we don't work with them, they kick us out of their counties. So we are collaborating very seriously, we are talking with them, and they are putting in money, we are putting in money, so it's a good collaboration. So finally, this, just before the end of last year, we launched a project together with Coffee Directorate, which is a regulatory body for coffee, and Coffee Research Institute in Kenya, where we are calling Integrated Coffee Productivity Project, and we are looking towards having 100,000 metric tons in 2020. In the late 80s and early 90s, Kenya used to produce over 130 metric tons. Then with liberalization, when it came and competition from real estate in Nairobi, there's an area called Kiambu. It used to be a coffee headquarters, if I may call it. Now it is skyscrapers and real estate and all that. So we are looking at ways of how do we get back to over 100 metric tons per year. And we are going to new emerging areas that didn't deal with coffee, like the western side of the Trans-Nzoia, the Rift Valley, the Central Rift. We're looking at areas where we didn't grow coffee before to replace the areas that has been taken over by the big city, Nairobi, in coffee. We're also looking at old trees. Remember, most of the trees were planted in the 50s and 60s. And most of the farmers are in their 80s and 90s. So as we replace the coffee trees, we are also seeing ways of bringing in young blood to the coffee. We are also looking at the challenge of poor quality of coffee, and we are doing a lot of capacity building, working together with Coffee Directorate, the Ministry of Agriculture, and Coffee Research Institute. So it's a joint program. That is what is happening under Commodities Fund of Kenya. And I'm very happy today that because we've interacted with the big brothers in the block, and we'll be looking at ways now of collaborating with multilateral organizations so that we can reach as many farmers as possible. Asante sana.